We are on Memdal Amud Beis 44b in the Gemara. So just saying how there's a discourse in a book called Derech Mitzvah. I think I mentioned this book before. It's a book written by the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe. It's the first book he ever wrote. He wrote it at a very young age. And it goes through many mitzvahs. It opens up with an outline of their halachic nature, and then goes on to the Kabbalistic and then Hasidic nature. So the mitzvah of Eglah Rufa is one of the mitzvahs that he covers in that book. And it's a short mimer. It's almost 2 pages. So perhaps we'll learn it at some point during our learning of Eglah Rufa, as well as there is Sikha talk, at least 1, maybe 2 even from the Rebbe on Eglah Rufa. So I haven't had a chance. I've found them, I have them, but I haven't had a chance to learn through them properly. But I will do that, B'ez Hashem, and then incorporate that into our learning as well. Yeah, so it'll give us more insight, more legs. Okay, let's begin the Gemara. So we discussed yesterday. We learned yesterday the verses from scripture that describe this unique mitzvah of Eglah Rufa. And then the Mishna had, 4 laws, 5 laws that we covered. Number 1, that the speeches have to be done in Lashon HaKodesh. The speech from the elders, right, which say the local elders. Well, let's back up. Actually, the verse described this very quickly, right? We found a corpse. We don't know where it came from. Elders come from Jerusalem, measure to the closest city. Elders from that city come out.
Elders or Sanhedrin?
Elders means Sanhedrin, as we'll discuss. Elders, as in the judges, the sages, the elders, the leaders. They come from Jerusalem. They come from Yerushalayim. We'll discuss that. And they measure to declare near a city. And then once they identify the nearest city, the elders from that city come out. They wash their hands over a calf in an open field, never been worked before. A calf never been worked before. And they declare that we didn't do anything wrong here. We gave them provisions. We don't know anything about this death. And even though, of course, they didn't do anything, obviously, but they should have provided for their guests that come to their city and make sure that they're properly escorted and provisioned for. And they decapitate right. And then the Kohen says, the Kohen are there say, Kapar Lamcha Yisrael, may God have atone. They decapitate the calf. And that's basically the system. That's the mitzvah.
They bring it to the water.
Bring it to a river, yeah. The Mishna discussed a number of laws. Number 1, that these speeches that the elders give in declaring that they are not responsible, and the kohen, which declares atonement, are to be given in the original Lashon HaKodesh. That's law number 1 for the Mishnah. Law number 2 is a dispute. How many judges need to come from Jerusalem to do the measuring? 3 or 5? The Gemara is going to discuss that. That's law number 2. Law number 3 is that it has to be out in open. It has to be out in an open field, rather than hanging from a tree, floating on the water, or buried in a mound of rocks. That was law number 3. All right? Derived from the verses we learned yesterday. And number 4, if it's close to the border, or if it's near a non-Jewish city, or a city that has no bezdin, then this mitzvah is called off, or the mitzvah doesn't apply, and measuring is only done to a city that has a bezdin. That's the Mishnah. Okay. Now, for the first law, which described which is the original Mishnah that has to be done in, sorry?
Oh, sorry, Lashon HaKodesh, right.
Yes, the first law that has to be in Lashon HaKodesh in the original Hebrew, which is why it's here in the Sotah to begin with, right?
Right.
So the Mishnah said, Shenemar, as the verse reads, Ki motzich kol b'adama. When you find a corpse on the ground. Now, that verse is just the opening verse of the laws. When you find a corpse lying on the ground, in where in those words is it indicated that it should be done in the original Hebrew? seems like nowhere. But you know the Gemara, Gemara's first question after the big letters. Micah Amar. What is the Mishnah meaning? What is the Mishnah trying to say? Literally, the Mishnah reads, Egla Rufa, the Egla Rufa, B'Lashon HaKodesh is to be stated in Lashon HaKodesh. Nemar, as the verse reads, Ki Matzah Chol B'Adama, when you find a corpse in the ground, V'Yotziz Ki'enecha V'Sheftecha, and your elders and your judges shall go out. And then it goes on to discuss how many judges come from Jerusalem to measure. But where is it indicated that it should be done in Hebrew? What does the Mishnah mean to say? Amar Rabbo, so Rabbo, he says, Hachika Amar, here's how you should read it. Okay, so before I go to Rabbo, go back to the Mishnah, and I'm going to read it for you the way Rabbo says it. And all you have to do is put a comma after the word shenemar. Okay? Like this.
HaKodesh shenemar?
Yes, exactly. Egla Rufa, the Egla Rufa, this is my suggested reading based on Rabbo.
Okay.
Egla Rufa, and you'll see why in a second. The Egla Rufa, B'Lashon HaKodesh, is to be done in the original Hebrew. Shenemar, as the verse says to, period. Now, you find a corpse in the ground. Now, you've already covered that. So, in other words, the law about Lashon HaKodesh is over after the word shenemar. Following? Egla Rufa is to be done in Lashon HaKodesh. Shenemar, as the verse says to, period.
As the verse, like, okay, and then here's the verse.
No. Period. As the verse says. Period. Not telling you which one.
Okay.
Now, the reason why it doesn't tell you which one is because the extrapolation that is supposed to be done in Hebrew here is the exact same as the extrapolations done for the previous ones. As we're going to see from Rabbi, where it says, Va'anu va'amru, the language, and they shall respond and say. Remember, that was the language used to describe, remember this? The original prototype Hebrew speaking was Hashem speaking at Mount Sinai. And from there we derived that the blessings and curses were in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. And the blessings and curses were, the verse says, Va'anu va'amru, they shall respond and say.
Yes.
And from there we derive that every other verse which says Va'anu va'amru, you should respond and say, also is in Hebrew.
Got it. Okay. That's how they attach this one.
Exactly. Because here too, as Rabbi says, it says Va'anu va'amru. Va'anu alavim, the Levim shall respond.
Established.
So it's already been established. Exactly. So therefore, this is how you read the Mishnah. Egla Rufa, the Egla Rufa, B'Lashon HaKodesh is to be said in Hebrew. Shenemar, as the verse reads to, as the verse says so, period. Law covered. As the verse says. You already know from the previous Mishnahs that the word Va'anu means, and they shall respond, means Lashon HaKodesh. And if you look at the verses about Egla Rufa, it says Va'anu, they should respond. Now, on the subject of Egla Rufa, let's go through the process. So go back to the beginning. The beginning of the verse reads, Ki Matzeh Chol B'Adama, when you find a corpse in the ground. V'Yotziz Ki'enecha V'Sheftecha, and your elders shall go out, and your judges shall go out. How many should go out? Shloisha, and so on. So the Ki Matzeh, this verse, is not the verse to tell you it's in Hebrew. It's the verse which begins the next law, which tells you how the order of the Egla Rufa should happen, beginning with the judges that come out. And the only word used as proof, so to speak, that it should be done in Lashon HaKodesh, in the original Hebrew, is the word shenemar, as it is written. You already know what's written. So the Egla Rufa is done in Lashon HaKodesh, as is written, period. Now, as for the Egla Rufa, Ki Matzeh Chol B'Adama, when you find a dead person, when you find a corpse in the ground, and so on and so forth. Follow? Mm-hmm. So now let's see Rabbi, and you'll see why I came to this conclusion. Yeah? So the Gemara asked Micah Amar, what's the meaning of the Mishnah? Yeah? Because the Mishnah doesn't indicate any verse that tells us it's in Hebrew.
But you just said before that it's the following verse or the preceding verse that tells you that the verse Ki Yimatzah is in Lashon HaKodesh.
Okay, so without
Rabbi, then you said after that, you said it's the word shenemar.
That's right, because
that precedes the verse.
I'm making the switch based on Rabbi Bo's comment.
Oh.
If you read the Mishnah without Rabbi Bo, you would assume shenemar means as is written what? The next words you're going to read.
Right.
Which you would think means, therefore, that somehow the words Ki Matzeh Chol, when you find a corpse in your ground, somehow teaches Lashon HaKodesh. Based on Rabbi Bo's reading, which we're about to read, I'm telling you to put a period after the word shenemar.
Because it's from Mount Sinai.
That's right.
And it's not shenemar. What is it?
It is shenemar. Shenemar is written, period. What's written? You already know what's written. Ki yimatzeh is not the continuation of the word shenemar, but ki yimatzeh is a new statement for the next law.
As is written.
Period.
So if that's a period, then we can't derive that next verse as the
Hebrew
for the Hebrew.
Exactly. Ki yimatzeh is just the beginning of the next law, because the next law. No, it's like this. Why is the Mishnah talking about egla rufa at all? Because Sotah is in Hebrew, some egla rufa is in Hebrew. Having cited egla rufa, let's go back to the beginning of the law and describe how it's done. And that's the words ki yimatzeh. Ki yimatzeh is the Mishnah going back to the beginning of egla rufa, having brought egla rufa to the table, because it's one of those mitzvahs that are done in the original Hebrew, as is written. Now let's go back to the beginning of the laws of egla rufa. Ki yimatzeh chol ba'adama, when you find the corpse in the ground, it's a new statement. Taking us back to the beginning of egla rufa, having introduced it because of the Hebrew element. Following? So the word shenemar is the conclusion of the first statement, and ki yimatzeh is the next statement. Clear?
But we haven't yet tied in that verse yet to Lashon HaKodesh, right?
It's not going to be tied into Lashon HaKodesh.
No.
Ki yimatzeh is not going to be tied into Lashon HaKodesh. Again, ki yimatzeh is the beginning of the next statement.
Okay.
Not following what I'm saying?
But I thought that's the verse that is mentioned.
That's what you would have thought without Rabbi.
Oh, okay.
Which is why Rabbi is coming to tell us, no, that's the wrong reading. Egla rufa Lashon HaKodesh shenemar, period. Ki yimatzeh is not the proof that it's Hebrew. Ki yimatzeh is the beginning of the next statement.
Okay. No, I know that's
clear. So ki yimatzeh is not how you derive Lashon HaKodesh. The derivation of Lashon HaKodesh is shenemar, as is written. Because we already know from previous missions how you derive Hebrew.
From that word.
So long as you have the word va'anu. I'm not even telling you. That's right. So the mission is not even telling it to you. Right, but what does the word shenemar mean? As is written. Period. Do as is written. Period. What's written? You already know what's written. Go to the previous missions and you'll see that anytime it says va'anu, it means Lashon HaKodesh, and egla rufa says va'anu. Don't have to repeat myself. But say it in Lashon HaKodesh as is written. Period. Now, ki yimatzeh is a new statement. Clear? So let's see how Rabbi says it. Yeah?
Yeah.
It's not the ordinary reading. Usually the word shenemar is an introduction to the next line you're about to read. As is written.
And here it seems.
And that's the way you would seem so.
There's a colon here.
Yes, because the colon actually could be a period in the original even though in my text there is no colon, but a colon could be a period either way. There is no colon here, but yes, that's how it usually is.
Right, because this is the science of.
That's right, but you're right. Usually shenemar means the beginning of the next is introducing what you're about to say.
Colon.
Right, so usually you would say shenemar, the verse reads what? The verse you're about to quote. So you would ordinarily think that ki yimatzeh somehow explains the Hebrew. But Rabbi is telling us not to read it that way. He's telling us to put a period after the word shenemar. And ki yimatzeh begins a new statement. So explains Rabbi how you would read it. Rabbi says, here's how you should say it. Do you have the Gemara there? Yeah. Third word after the big Gimel Mem after the word Gemara.
Yeah.
Rabbi says, that's the Heikuf. Here's how you should read it. Shenemar, as the verse reads. What does the verse read to tell you Hebrew? Not ki yimatzeh. The words ki yimatzeh has nothing to do with the Hebrew. What is written? It's written va'anu va'amru. It says, and you shall respond and say.
And then after that.
V'lahalanu omer, and later with respect to the blessings and curses, omer, the verse reads, va'anu halavim va'amru, the Levim shall respond and say the blessing and the curse. Ma'aniya amur lahalon, just as the responding of the Levim by the blessings and curses is in Hebrew, Lashon HaKodesh is in Hebrew, the original holy language. Afkan, so to hear by Egla rufa, Lashon HaKodesh is the whole original holy language. Period. Now, having raised the discussion of Egla rufa in connection with the fact that it's an original Lashon HaKodesh, just like Sotah, the Mishnah continues, the Seder Egla rufa ketzad, how is the order of the Egla rufa to be done? Answer the next line, when you find a corpse in the ground. So when you find the corpse in the ground is the beginning of the next statement to discuss how Egla rufa is done from the beginning. Right? Because the Mishnah began with the middle of the Egla rufa. This is not tractate Egla rufa, this is tractate Sotah. So we only raised Egla rufa because somewhere in the middle of the process there's a speech, and that speech has to be done in the original Lashon HaKodesh. Having raised that, now let's go back to the beginning of the law and say, okay, what is Egla rufa and how do you do it? Okay, let's go back to the beginning. The beginning says, When you find a corpse in the ground, and your elders and your judges will go out. Three from the high court in Jerusalem, they will go out, etc., etc.
It's just being informative.
Correct.
At that point.
Correct.
But not to prove that it's supposed to be in Lashon HaKodesh.
That's correct.
That's already been established.
That's right. So that's right. That's right. That's right. The
Okay.
word shenemar is enough to tell you that it's in Hebrew.
That's Rabbi.
Why? That's Rabbi always understanding of the Mishnah, right? So that's why I said the way you read it would be Egla Rufa. The Egla Rufa b'Lashon HaKodesh is to be said in the original Hebrew. Shenemar, as the verse reads. Period. What does the verse read? You already know from the previous derivations what it reads. You already know that whenever it says ba'anu, that they respond, that should be in the original Hebrew. And it says ba'anu, and they should respond by Egla Rufa. Okay, having raised the issue of Egla Rufa in regard to the Lashon HaKodesh, let's understand what this Egla Rufa is. And then the Mishnah takes you back to the beginning, where it says, Ki matzachal ba'adama, when you find the corpse in the ground, and so on and so forth. Clear? It's a unique reading, because you're right. Usually Shenemar is like an introductory to the verse you're about to quote. But in this case, Rabbi always says not to do it that way. Even though that's how the Gemara thought it was, which is why the Gemara asked, "My Kamar, what are you saying?" There is no indication in the verse Ki Matzeh to tell you that it's in Hebrew. That's what the Gemara asked, right? My Kamar, what are you saying? To which Rabbi always says, "Oh, here's how you should read it: put a period after the word Shenamar." Clear?
But why do you need a period? Why can't Shenemar just be the trigger for people to know that whatever follows Shenemar is to be in Lashon HaKodesh? Because
you know how that read it and translate it. Tell me how you read that.
Lashon HaKodesh,
Mm-hmm.
Shenemar, and then the colon, and then this following is the Lashon HaKodesh. Because
No,
of,
you don't. No one has to read. Hold on a second.
Shenemar.
They don't have to read Ki Matzechal Badama. Ki Matzechal Badama translates as when you find a corpse in the ground. That's not part of the speech.
Oh, that's not part of the
No.
speech.
The speech is only verse 7 and 8 we saw yesterday, right? One is Daniel Leishofcho Sadam Hazeh. Our hands did not spill his blood,
okay.
and the other speech is Kapar L'Amcha Yisrael, atone for your people Israel.
Okay, that's where I got confused.
Yeah, Ki Matzeh is not part of the speech.
That's where I was having.
No, Ki Matzeh is just a description of the verse describing the scenario in which the mitzvah is applied.
Okay, but going back, you would first think that would be
because that's the way usually Shenemar reads.
Right. Okay, but now I understand. Okay, you put the period there.
Exactly.
To tell you that whatever has to be said in Lashon HaKodesh has to.
Yes. Right. How do you know that? Shenemar is the verse reads. Period. Okay. What does the verse read? Well, you already know from before that anytime it says Ba'anu, it's in Lashon HaKodesh, and by Egla Rufa it says Ba'anu. Okay. And now, having raised the issue of Egla Rufa, let's go back to the beginning and discuss how it's done. Okay, you might say when you find, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Clear?
It's just now procedurally what happened. When this would trigger when you find a.
Exactly right.
Okay.
Exactly right.
Okay.
In other words, because
that's the condition
upon
right. which you would have to.
That's right.
Use.
Had this been Mesechta Egla Rufa,
right?
Had this been tracted Egla Rufa, then the Mishnah would have started with Ki Matzeh.
Is it tracked?
No, there isn't. But had this been, then the Mishnah would have started with Ki Matzeh, and then put the law of Lashon HaKodesh somewhere in the middle of the procedure. But this whole law only came up tangentially connected to Sotah because it's done in Hebrew. But the Hebrew is not the beginning of the procedure. The Hebrew is in the middle of the procedure. So having introduced that, the Mishnah is not going back to the beginning. That's what's happening. So that's why I said put the period after the word Shenemar.
Yeah.
And you already know the Shenemar because we already told you before in previous Mishnahs that whenever it says Va'anu and you shall respond, you derive from the response of the Levim at the blessings and curses. It's got to be in the original Hebrew.
7 or 8 has those words.
Va'anu haLevim. Yes, it does. That's correct. There you go. That's right. That's right. Exactly right.
Trying to piece this together. Okay.
You got it. Very good. Okay. Okay, I'm going to stop over here because the Gemara now is going to introduce and going to analyze a dispute about whether 5 judges go out or whether 3 judges go out. That's the next law. That's the first law. It's really the first law. It's the second law in the Mishnah, but it's the first law in the procedure.
Yeah.
Right, because you find the first law in the procedure is you find the corpse. Now, what's the first thing you do? Bring judges from Jerusalem. How many? 3 or 5. Right. So the Mishnah actually gave us the derivation for how you get to 5. Because it says Zikenecha, your elders, in plural, 2. Sheftecha, your judges, plural, 2. And you can't have an odd number, an even number, so you have to add a fifth to make it odd. That was Rabbi Huda's thinking, right?
Right. So there is a distinction between elders and judges.
They're the same people, but they're given different titles.
Oh, right.
And because they're both titles,
learned.
right? But because that's right. So because it says your elders, plural, that's 2. It says again your judges, plural, that's 4. You can't have an even, so you add a fifth.
Right.
That was Rabbi Huda's thinking. But the Mishnah did not tell us what they're thinking of to get to 3 only, other than a bezdin is a minimum of 3. Right, but we didn't really derive that from the verses yet. And how do those who say 3 respond to the fact that the verse says judges and elders, which seem to be double plural, giving us 4? How do they respond to that understanding? Right? So the Gemara is going to go through an exercise in which it parses through every single letter and word in these verses and substantiates both views, the view that says it's 5 and the view that says it's 3, to match each word and letter in the verse. That's often the exercise, right? Because they're all using the 13 principles of derivation. Yeah. So they all have to be using it to come to their same conclusion. How do they do that? And why do they, and how do they justify every single letter and word and every single rule of interpretation come to different conclusions? Right. So that's the exercise we're going to be doing, God willing, tomorrow. Tomorrow, davening is at 8:30, which means we're done a little later. So we'll see what everybody's up to. And if there's time for a class, we'll do it. Otherwise, we'll pick up after the break. Either way. Freilich and Hanukkah, and enjoy the extra, hour of sleep. Good day.